So the last time when I discussed the role of how Karma Mimansa has been integrated into the Bhagavad Gita, I pointed out that Karma Mimansa is essentially a philosophy or a darshana which is based on the performance of Vedic ritual, the Karma Kanda, which necessitates the performance of Havan or Deva Yajna to appease the gods, and the gods in return will give you your requirements for surviving and living in plenty on this earth. So there are many benefits to the performance of yajna as far as karma mimamsa is concerned. One is that it ensures that your requirements for this world are fulfilled. You require rain, you will get rain. If you require wealth, you will get wealth. If you require whatever you require on this earth to live and to survive, that will be provided by the performance of yajna. But Krishna doesn't want you to perform all these things for the sake of a fruit. Another fruit that you will get is that besides getting the requirements of the wherewithal to live happily on this earth, all the material things that you require to live on this earth, you also are guaranteed to go to heaven. And after you go to heaven, when you are reborn, you will be reborn in a family that is better than the one you have been born in. So you will have better, you will have greater beauty, you will have greater wealth, you will have greater knowledge, and in every way, your next birth will be better. So these are all the things that are described in the Karma Kanda. And thus, by performing this yajna or this havan to appease the gods, to feed the gods, gods will feed you in return. This is what we did in the Bhagavad Gita last time. Now, it's important to understand that when you read the Bhagavad Gita, if you read only one chapter at a time, or even part of a chapter at a time, you will not understand Bhagavad Gita in its entirety. Because the Bhagavad Gita is spread out over many chapters, and throughout the whole of the Bhagavad Gita, you will find threads that you can connect. So, last time I had stopped, I think, at third chapter, 16th verse. And in the third chapter, 16th verse, I had pointed out that if you do not perform this yajna, this fire sacrifice, this Devi yajna, then you are leading a life of sin. Krishna also says that yo yastva atma ratirevasya de atma triptascha manava atmanya evacha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. So if you are taking delight in the spirit, you are illumined in the spirit, you rejoice in and you are self-satisfied in the spirit, for such a person, there is no need to perform these yajnas. There is no need to perform these yajnas. And he says further that if you are truly situated on that spiritual platform, you have no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of your prescribed duties. Because the performance of your prescribed duties, the performance of your prescribed yagyas, deva yagya, will result in your purification. But if you have already realized God, if you have already been situated on Brahma Bhut, then certainly you have no need to perform this. But he says, you also have no need not to perform this. So, Krishna points out that the enlightened person does not need to do work, but the enlightened person doesn't need not to do work either because he is self-satisfied within himself. So he is not affected by the politics at work. He is not affected with the nature of the task that he is performing. He is completely self-satisfied and content, and he will work in the best possible manner in the circumstances that he has been given. So he has no reason to depend on any other living being. He has no reason to work, and he has no reason not to work. And therefore, Krishna's instruction is very clear. Tasmad asakta satatam karyam karma samacharah asakto hi acharan karma paramapnoti purusha. That without being attached to the fruits of your activities and your karma kand, yagyas, you should act and perform all your duties, including your karma kand duties, by working without attachment. And thus, Krishna says, you will attain the supreme. And then he goes on to say that even the great king Janaka achieved perfection by living as a householder and a king. And he continued to do so for the welfare of people in general. And he also points out that you must continue to work because as great people do, so do the others follow. And whatever example that is set by these self-realized souls, these God-realized souls, the rest of the world will imitate. Therefore, if you think that you are great and you have realized God, don't think that you are excused from doing work. You have to work not because you need purification for yourself, but indeed you need to do work to set an example to other people. And also, as a matter of fact, you must understand that most people are, as long as they are within this body, cannot give up performing their work or their sacrifice. So if you read only the second chapter, you will think, oh, Krishna is speaking against the Vedas. Because Krishna says, Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunya Bhavarjuna Nirdvandva Nitya Sattvasto Niryoga Kshem Atmavan. Don't waste your time focusing on the three gunas which the Vedas deal with. So you will say, oh, Krishna doesn't want you to perform Vedic ritual. When you read the third chapter, then you will understand that surely Krishna wants you to perform these rituals. Then you go on to the fourth chapter. And when you go on to the fourth chapter, Krishna gives you an out. What do you mean Krishna gives you an out? Krishna insists that yajna is necessary. But even while Krishna is insisting that yajna is necessary, he is gradually in the fourth chapter transitioning from Deva Yajna, which is the fire sacrifice. And he goes on to describe a number of other sacrifices. which he says are mentioned in the Vedas. And these sacrifices also, Krishna explains, are also yajna. So, yes, Krishna does recommend the performance of Vedic yajna in the form of Deva yajna or fire sacrifice. When you go on to the fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, then Krishna explains that there are many other types of yajnas also, through which you can become enlightened. And what are these types of yajnas through which you can become enlightened? You can go to chapter 4, text 25, and he says that of course there is Deva Yajna. You offer different sacrifices to the Devatas. And others, they offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. And yet, there are other forms of sacrifice, he points out. And these forms of sacrifice are sacrifices where the senses are individually controlled, where the mind is controlled, and along with the mind, the senses are controlled, where people give their wealth in charity and then living in pure austerity, they take strict vows and they practice yoga or meditation. And yet others use the study of the Vedas as a yajna. So you will see that Krishna, first he denounces performing Vedic yajna for getting fruit. He then goes on to saying that it is a valid form of sacrifice. It is laid down in the Vedas and God has created the system. And when you think that, yes, now we should all perform Vedic yajnas only, he goes on to chapter 4 and then he explains that there are indeed many, many forms of yajnas. And in these many forms of yajnas, all of them, as he says, are mentioned in the Vedas. And all these people who perform these sacrifices or yajna, which have been described now in chapter 4, he says they become cleansed of sinful reaction. In chapter 4, verse number 30, Krishna clearly mentions Sarva apiyete yagna vido yagna shapita kalmashah yagna shishtamrita bhujo yanti brahma sanatanam. All these performers who know what is yajna become cleansed of sinful reaction. And having tasted the remnants of such sacrifice, all of them go to the supreme eternal abode. So with this, the Lord clarifies that yes, I approve of the method of Karma Mimansa, which is performing Deva Yajna, but I don't approve of it for getting material gain. I want you to perform this sacrifice as a means of purification. And by this purification does one gets knowledge. So this is very, very important. Through the purification of performing yajna, one gets knowledge. Don't think that knowledge comes from X, Y, or Z. Knowledge, Krishna explains very, very clearly, comes from the performance of yajna. And when you perform yajna, not just the yajna that is present in the third chapter as Karma Mimansa, but also other forms of yajna. And what is the critical aspect of these yajnas? What is the central theme of the yajnas? You will find it when you perform a havan. You say, idam agnaya idam na mama. So you are saying this is meant for you, O Lord. It is not meant for me. What does this mean? That is sacrifice. You're sacrificing your time, you're sacrificing your attention, you're sacrificing your focus, not on yourself, but away from you. It is a focus on remembering God and forgetting self. And so, when you are remembering God and forgetting self, this constant remembrance of God, this continual remembrance of God, this absorption in God to the extent of extinction of sense of self, then what happens? Then one gets knowledge. And what is this knowledge that one gets? Krishna explains, Yaj gnatva na punar moham evam yasyasi pandava sarva bhutani asheshani drakshasya atmano atmani. When you have learned the truth, you will realize that all beings lie within me, they're in me and they're mine. You will understand the context of Vedanta. You will understand the realization of Vedanta, which is all things lie in God, including you. And since all things lie within God, everything is divine. And how do you learn to perform yajna? To perform any form of yajna, you need to approach a teacher. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnananas tattva dachanam. So you approach a teacher, inquire from him submissively, and the person who has realized the fruit of that sacrifice, he can teach you because he has gone along that path and he has seen the fruit. In the Kathopanishad it is mentioned that Uttishta Jagrata Varan Nibodata Shurasya Dhara Nishita Duratyaya Durgam Patastad Kavayo Vadanti Mahajano Yena Gata Sapantaha. That the path of spiritual life is like a razor's edge, and therefore you must follow in the footsteps of those great souls who have preceded you, because they can guide you. And thus, this knowledge, this realization that all things are within Krishna, they are within Him, there is, and they are all within Him and there is, they are all part of Him. That knowledge will save you from all miseries. And this is elaborated further, which is the result of sacrifice. And from text 36 onwards, he explains that even if you are the greatest sinner amongst all sinners, once you have this knowledge by performing yajna or sacrifice, you will find that your miseries you will cross over the ocean of miseries of your life on this boat of knowledge. And just as a fire turns firewood into ashes, so does this fire of knowledge burn to ashes all your karmic, your bad karmic path which you have incurred in this life. And having said this, now Krishna goes on to chapter 5. And in chapter 5, Krishna takes this aspect of yajna one step further. Whereas in second chapter, he denounced performing Deva Yajna for the sake of fire sacrifice for the sake of fruit. like going to heaven, etc., etc. Then in third chapter, he says, yes, it's a valid system. In the fourth chapter, he says there are many, many forms of sacrifice. All of these sacrifices will purify you and bring you to the platform of transcendental realization of God. You will get the supreme knowledge. Knowledge is not knowledge that you get in books. Knowledge is not knowledge that you get in lectures or classes or videos. Knowledge is that realization that all things lie within God, they're within Him, they're part of Him. So, having said this, Krishna then goes on to the fifth chapter, where he goes on to say that the yajna he recommends is the yajna of performing your work in a spirit of devotion. And that is described in detail in text 8 to 9 in chapter 5. Naiva kinchit karomiti yuktamanyeta tattva with pashyan shrinvan sprishan jigran ashnan gachan swapan swashan pralapam visrijan grinan unmisham nimisham api indriyani indriyartheshu vartantya ite dharaya. So whether you're seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping, breathing, you know that you do nothing because it's your prakriti that is doing everything. And while you're speaking, evacuating, receiving, opening, closing your eyes, the yogi knows that only the prakriti material senses are engaged with their objects and he is aloof from them. And that he has to perform his work in that manner. And in fact, Krishna says that one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results to the Supreme Lord, he is not affected by any sin, just as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. Please understand, actions done for God are free of sin. Actions done for God are free of papa. But done for self, they are full of papa. Therefore, Krishna says, Brahmanya adhaya karmani sangam tyaktva karoti yah lipyate na sa papena padma patram evam vasa. So Krishna goes on to describe that indeed your work should be done as an offering to God. That is the yajna which he recommends. After all, if you see in the world, most of the time, what are we doing? Most of the time, we are fulfilling our duties. We are doing our job, our profession, our business. We are engaged in activity. And if that activity which occupies most of your day is now offered to God, then indeed most of your life becomes a prayer. And the objective is to make your whole life a meditation on God. A whole life should become a prayer to God. Kayena manasa buddhaya kevalerindriyerapi yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaya. With their body, with their mind, their intelligence, even with their senses, all yogis without attachment continue to work. For what? They continue to work for the sake of purification. So, purification is so important and yajna is so important that Krishna points out later in the Bhagavad Geeta that you may give up anything, but you can't give up yajna, dana, tapa, karma, Natyajam karyam evatat yagya dana tapa karma pavanani manishinam. That the performance of yagya, charity or giving, acts of giving, and tapaha, acts of austerity or restriction of your sense gratification so that you can spend more time devoted to God. All of these, he points out, all of these uh, would be the means by which you will find peace. So your work should be performed to please God. And doing that as a sacrifice makes most of your life, most of your day absorbed in God. If you're doing it every moment of your work. But what do you do when you're not working? What do you do with your discretionary time? And for this, Krishna has an answer much later when he points out in the Bhagavad Gita that he is of all sacrifices, of all yagyas, yajnanam japo yagnosmi, of all forms of yagya, I am the chanting of the holy names. So yes, Krishna wants you to use your work as a yagya, but when you are not working, in your discretionary time, Krishna wants you to chant his name. That's why he says, Yajnanam Japo Yagnosmi. It is stated in the scriptures that Krite Yad Dhyayate Vishnu Tretayam Yajato Makhai Dwapare Paricharyayam Kalau Tadhari Kirtanat. In Satyug, the method was meditation. Prescribed method to realize God was meditation in Satyug. In Treta Yuga, the prescribed method to attain God was to perform Havan, fire sacrifice. In Dwapar Yuga, the prescribed method to realize God was to worship Him in the temple, worship the Murti of Krishna. But in KaliYug, the prescribed method is to chant His holy name. Harer Nam eva kevalam, kalau nasteva, datir anyatha. In KaliYug, there is no other way except chanting the holy name. In KaliYug, there is no other way other than chanting the holy name. In KaliYug, there is no other way other than chanting the holy name. In the Kali Santarana Upanishad, the Upanishad meant for KaliYug, it has been mentioned. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Iti Shodashakam Nam Kali Kalmashu Nashanam Nata Paratarapaya Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. By chanting this 16-syllable mantra, all the realizations of the scriptures of the Vedas will all come to you and you will attain salvation. However, please understand, if you are following the Bhagavad Gita, you don't spend your whole day chanting and ignore your work. Priority always goes to the performance of your duty. That is the direct instruction of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. So your duty in your workplace, your duty in your home, your duty to your parents, your duty to your spouse, your duty to your children, your duty to society, all these duties come first. Chanting is meant for the discretionary time you have at hand. And in fact, it would be wonderful if you used all your discretionary time in chanting, other than when you were working and doing your duty. Because by using all your discretionary time in chanting, which would amount to about 4 hours of the day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, you will find that the combination of doing work as a sacrifice to Krishna and this sandwich which you make of having 2 hours of chanting in the morning and 2 hours of chanting in the evening, of chanting 16 malas in the morning and 16 malas of this Hare Krishna mantra in the evening, you will find that this combination sandwich will give you tremendous peace and give you great relief from suffering. So, from second chapter, decrying, denouncing, performing yagya, Vedic yagya for getting fruit, to the third chapter, where he gives it credibility and affirms it as a prescribed method in the Vedas. To the fourth chapter, where he points out that there are multiple forms of yajna that can be performed, and all of them are valid. To the 10th chapter, where he mentions that yajnanam japo yagnosmi, that I am the chanting of the holy name. To the 5th chapter, where he clearly mentions that the work that you do must be performed as yajna. To the prescription I am giving you, and the prescription is you chant in the morning, 2 hours, chant after your work, 2 hours in the evening, and spend the rest of your time in fulfilling your duties and responsibilities. And in 15 days, you will get a tremendous benefit, which you will guaranteed. You're guaranteed to get it. Otherwise, please contact me. So I will pause here. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask me now. If you read Manusmriti and you read other scriptures, you will see that the yajna is prescribed in different formats for the human beings, for all pious human beings. That there is what they know as Nitya Yajna, then there is Naimitik Yajna or Naimitik Sanskara, Nitya Sanskara, Naimitik Sanskara, both of which are yajna, all of which are yajnas. And Kamya Sanskara, which is a Kamya Karma, which is performed for fulfilling some material desires you have. So for your Nitya Karmas, or for your Nitya Sanskaras, or your Nitya Yajnas, you have Deva Yajna, which is fire sacrifice, which is performed to appease the gods. Second is the performance of study of the scripture, which is called Rishi Yajna, because the Rishis have put down all the scriptures not to be wasted but to be studied by you. So you respect them and you perform sacrifice by studying them. Then there is what we call as Pitra Yajna, that the ancestors who have given you this body through their genetic package, you have to please them by the performance of Shraddha as well as the regular performance of Tarpana, or the offering of water to the ancestors. Then there is what we call as Atiti Yajna, where saintly, holy people unexpectedly arrive at your doorstep, and to honor them and feed them is also a yajna to such people who populate the earth, spreading knowledge of God. And lastly, you have Bhuta Yajna, so that all insects, all birds, all animals do not go hungry. You scatter some food aside on the ground before you eat, so that all are fed. So this is described in the Manusmriti as the forms of yajna for pious human beings. You have, of course, the other Naimitic Sanskara or the Naimitic Yagyas. These Naimitic Yagyas are indeed the fire sacrifices which are performed as milestones in your life. So there are before conception, there is Garbhadana Sanskara. Then there are two when the woman is carrying the child in the womb. There are two fire sacrifices at different intervals, I think second and fifth month, or second and seventh month. Then there is the fire sacrifice that is performed at you know, naming ceremony. Then there is like this. There are 64 forms of sacrifice, of which probably 49 are known, and maybe about 12 of them are practiced, which include your wedding and also your Antyeshti, or the ceremonies performed at the time of death. So if anyone has anything to say, please feel free to. If you have any queries or questions or comments, please ask me now. You can enter it in the comments. If not now, we'll see that the questions are answered. All right. So, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hari Om to everybody.